All right. Yeah, we'll leave you with fun podcast.
It's supposed to be live. What's going on?
Oh, cool. Yeah,
Casting
well, thank you.
live.
Please do. Please do. That would be the ultimate moment. Yes. All right. Well, I'll see you soon. All right. Well.
Why is it not? Should I send you another invite from here?
Sure. Try it.
Invite.
It's not as good yet. It should have been here.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No.
It's that.
Right. Do you have it online anywhere? Oh, no, this is a good time. This is good. Okay. All right. Let me just.
I'm gonna just check. Okay, go ahead. Do yours, and then I'm gonna try to log in on my Facebook and see if it.
Okay.
Did it work out?
Well, it's saying broadcasting here. But I'm not sure.
Okay. Should I try the top one again?
Yeah, let me send you another. I did. Let me send you another invite, right?
Oh, there we are.
You see it?
It looks well. Looks like something.
I think there's a little bit of lag. Oh, there we go.
Okay, I think it's working.
So the resolution is not the greatest. Huh?
Yeah, go ahead. Do yours, then I'm gonna try to log in on Facebook and see if it.
Okay.
Did it work out?
Well, the same broadcasting here. But I'm not sure.
Try the top one again.
Yeah, let me send you another. I did. Let me send you another invite.
Oh, there we are.
You see it? I think it's a little bit lag. I think so. We are broadcasting.
Yeah. Okay, I'm gonna log out. Have to find it. Oh.
Now's the time.
All right.
I just went to the one right there. Hey, by the way, this stuff gets recorded on YouTube automatically.
So we can go.
Oh, does it?
Yeah.
A lot of people ask me that.
Yeah, that's what it says somewhere that it gets recorded on YouTube automatically. So it will get published whether we like it or not.
Oh,
So that's okay with that.
Let me get a call.
Yeah, no.
Okay. Yeah, because I was trying to see if there's a way I can disable that.
Hello. Coming up for you.
Are you going to set it back? I think so.
It looked like we were broadcasting.
You gonna try your Facebook link?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, let's try that because we got like 4 copies of this.
First time you guys will all see my crazy party.
That's right. Drinking parties and like.
Around the internet, it's pretty sure. So why you both pretty sensitive?
Don't make any comments on the president.
What's that? Oh, yeah.
You shouldn't say that about the president.
Okay.
So you know what? Is that it's you know that there must have been one where I was on this. Is there a way to change the link maybe?
Yeah, we could,
Is that a free? What
Yeah, I
is
think.
that?
Oh, that I was trying to set the camera, I guess.
This is fascinating.
Yeah.
Let me send you an invite to your. What was your email again?
oh, it's Michael Seman and that's SEMAN, the number 5000 at gmail.com.
Okay.
What's your credit card information?
Okay, let's make sure this works. I wish the camera had a better resolution. The details in the slides might be a little bit distorted.
What's the? Yeah, I can imagine, I mean, it has a big website, I can keep you busy. Well, I got.
Okay, which one should you?
Hi, Paul.
Sorry, wrote you back.
Yeah, that was good.
Nice, pretty nice note.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah.
I've got the concept that it was kind of guide me
Oh,
through
really?
what made.
That's good. That's good.
Yeah, I could probably get a thesis on just that.
Jeff just how to work the site, the TWDB site.
Yeah, that too. Yeah, mainly just where the water's coming from and going to.
We're being broadcast live on the web.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
I'll be on that best behavior.
Are we really?
Yeah, we are
What's
actually.
it- Why are we doing this? Do you want to do it?
Yeah,
You did?
yeah. He's got followers, like
Oh, okay.
thousands. I don't know.
ND group or whatever?
I don't know if it's thousands.
Jeez, that's pretty cool.
That's the first time that we've done this, isn't it? We have to be careful what we say though, because apparently this gets
Yeah,
posted on
right, you
YouTube.
better tell them.
It's already on. Oh,
So do you know about Indian music? Would you recognize it?
I might do this. Have you been listening to it?
I'm not sure how to recognize it. Okay, I have a vague idea.
Is there a good
Yeah, yeah.
Indian music band? You know,
I think it's a trend that's
Oh.
been pretty popular.
Is that?
Sort of.
Sort of.
This goes onto the internet.
Yeah, I heard
It's
about that.
archived on
That's
YouTube.
pretty cool. That's pretty cool.
I guess it gets indexed too, so we could probably have a series of ourselves on YouTube.
Right.
I still show my students sometimes that 5 themes of geography.
Oh.
That quickly get annoyed.
It's catchy.
Yeah.
My boys like it.
Yeah, it is. It's actually not bad. That group seems
the next installment in our Friday seminar. I do want to mention, just as we're getting going here, that we have incentive for you to stay around to the end. Of course, you're going to stay to the end anyways. This will be a scintillating talk with our guest speaker. We'll get to it in just a second here. But we are having a mixer afterwards as well. So I wanted to mention that. There's snacks over next door. I don't know if that includes steak and lobster or anything. Is that in the department budget? I guess it's not. But anyways, we are doing it the best we can to offer you the finest cuisine that's available on this side of UNT. So please look forward to that. We're pleased to welcome Michael Seman, our speaker for the day here today. We're pleased to have anyone, quite honestly, talk in our series. But sorry, Michael. Did I say that out loud? I'm sorry. We're pleased to have Michael here. Michael is a alumnus of ours. We're just pleased to see him come back, and we know that he's been doing a lot of great things since he left here. Before he came to UNT, he was an executive with a creative artists agency out in Los Angeles area. So he came already with some real good real-world experience. He came and he did his master's degree with us with a specialization in urban economic geography. And since leaving here, he's completed a PhD in urban policy planning. Urban planning policy. Don't want to mangle the department, sorry, at UT Arlington. So he's just graduated with that, and what he's here today is just to share a little bit from his dissertation findings. So really looking forward to your comments here. Thanks so much for pleasuring us with your presence here, and we're looking forward to it. Thanks a lot. Warm welcome to Michael.
So I woke up in the van on the side street in Chicago. I had no idea where I was. It was a July morning, and at 9 a.m. it was already uncomfortably hot. But I was on tour, so that was basically part of the course. Now on that day, though, as I walked across the street to take a shower at the Walgreens, I thought to myself, is this really any different than my friend's sister who used to sleep underneath the desk every night while launching a startup in Northern California? I mean, what if Hewlett and Packard had started a band instead? Our music scene is a collection of entrepreneurs, fans, venues, recording studios, and more, like Silicon Valley. Are bands firms and scenes cauldrons of innovation? This is the question I chose to explore for my dissertation in urban planning and public policy at the University of Texas at Arlington. Now, luckily, I happen to be in one of the most thriving music scenes in the nation, if not the world. And on top of that, I was also in the band. So what I decided to do was examine Denver's music scene. Now, Denver's music scene is internationally recognized, nationally recognized. Many bands have gone on to do really fantastic high profile things. And at any one given time, there's estimated at least 100 bands in operation, varying genres. Now, this is pretty good for a city of 113,000 people. In fact, in some ways, we're like the Green Bay Packers of India. Now, all this is important to understand because when you're looking at urban economics, you absolutely have to understand the stories behind the numbers. But before we talk about this, what I'd like to do is talk a little bit about regional growth theory. Now, regional growth theory seeks to answer why certain places are more economically successful than others. Like, why was Pittsburgh thriving in the 1900s? Why did Los Angeles dominate in the 1980s? As early as the turn of the 20th century, researchers have examined this and designed models to try to explain it. Now, the first models offered that the competitive advantage of firms and subsequently regions was based on economies of scale, resource availability, minimization of input costs, transport access, basically the geographic aspects of agglomerations. So if you think of it this way, it was where's the natural resource that I can get my product to make my product? And how close am I to the people I'm going to sell my product to? The typical thing of, I have my steel factory on the river because I can receive materials in, and then I can ship materials out, finished products. Now, this was worked for a while, but by the 1980s, the national economy was shifting. There was a rapid increase in globalization. New streams of foreign investment, new trade channels were opening, and manufacturing continued to decline from its all-time high post-World War II. So researchers started to think, well, the old models are no longer really capable of explaining regional growth. Now, some of these people offered that highly skilled human capital and how they use technology were important overlooked variables and helped explain why certain regions were more competitive in this new economic landscape. Basically, they were looking at the ingredients of the agglomerations. Now, within a few years, these theories were once again refined. And this is basically due to the explosive growth of Silicon Valley and the unique way that it operates as a region. Now, Silicon Valley is a collection of firms of related industries that compete but also cooperate. It's a place where employment is fluid amongst firms, and ideas will emerge in one company and spin off and become an entirely new company. There's a density of firms and employees, and they're all sort of working together, having knowledge spillovers with ideas bouncing around. And to give an example of how odd and unique this is, you can have an employee at firm A decide he's not really into it, or she's not really into it anymore, and go to firm B, but continue talking about different items of business and what some may say are trade secrets. It's no big deal. Then, if that employee at firm B, let's say she wants to start, she gets an idea from working at firm B and decides to start her own firm, firm C. Well, they're still all talking with each other. Basically, there's this spillover that's a really low barrier to entry and a lot of sharing of information. Sort of a rising tide lifts all boats. Now, this is really nothing new. Economists Alfred Marshall looked at the same scenario in a region of Italy in the late 1800s. And he noted that because of the density of these craftsmen that were working on more or less the same items, the, quote, the mysteries of the trade became no mysteries, but are, as it were, in the air. Now, a little bit later, in the 1990s, Harvard economist Michael Porter examined Silicon Valley and other similar regions, successful ones like Napa Valley, California wine industry, and he thought that their growth could be explained by how geography, the highly skilled human capital, and technology all interact. That if certain dynamics were present, what he termed economic clusters would form, giving a region locational competitive advantage that offered increased productivity, innovation, and new business formation. Now, let's look at a graphic representation of this. Now, to visualize the concept of economic clusters, Porter created what he called a diamond. And it illustrates the locational dynamics necessary for clustering to occur, giving a regional location competitive advantage. Now, these dynamics include factor inputs, related and supporting industries, demand conditions, and competition and cooperation. Healthy competition, but still a healthy cooperation. Now, what I did was to place Denton's music scene into Porter's diamond to see if it operated like an economic cluster. I was shocked and surprised to find that no one had ever done this in academic research or even in popular culture. Through extensive interviews and observation, again, luckily I was in a band for 8 years at this point in Denton. I was able to gain a pretty good assessment of how this thing operated. I was able to get as close as humanly possible to the working mechanics of the music scene. Now, with regard to time, I'll briefly detail some examples of the scenes fit inside the diamond. I can talk about this for hours. If you don't believe me, please ask my friends. Now, in terms of factor inputs, the most important factors were the public and quasi-public goods of UNT and inexpensive rental housing. UNT's music, art, design, and film programs attract and train the highly skilled human capital that supplies all firms. And it's important to note that bands operate as firms. That's an emerging thought within literature, both academic and professional, that bands for years operated as firms, and people now are starting to understand that. Now, unlike the positive connection between Stanford and Silicon Valley, many I interviewed noted that there was an almost adversarial nature between UNT's music school and the local scene. Additionally, the majority of scene participants playing in bands that attended UNT at some point were not from the music program, but other programs like radio, television, film, graphic design, geography, or photography, things such as that. The wealth of inexpensive rental housing operates as spaces of incubation. It's not uncommon for bands, recording engineers, screen printers, entrepreneurs of all types to use the spaces they live in for things like rehearsal, recording, filmmaking, screen printing, and even branded long-running venues with international connections. The value of house shows cannot be overstated when you're talking about development of a economic cluster as a music scene. There's been several house shows that have run for years in Denton that would book bands from international places. In fact, one time, I believe it was Norwegian black metal band Noxat was playing my friend's living room. That's not uncommon in Denton. It is, I should say, though, a little bit more uncommon than you get overseas. Now, when considering related and supporting industries, at the bottom, there are a wealth of capable, locally based suppliers. Remember that many of the scene members are not only in bands, but also students in the highly competitive programs at UNT that are in art, design, photography, filmmaking. And not only are they in bands, but they're students that are highly skilled and trained. They're looking to build their portfolios. So what I found was a lot of these students were either for nothing for their own band, or maybe at most a low cost for their friends' bands, making these really top-notch promotional materials that basically, again, rise, the tide is rising on boats. So it's interesting, a lot of times you see a video from someone that's invented, it is basically the same thing as a video from a major label. And it's because you have this highly skilled human capital that's willing to work for nothing to build her own capital. Demand conditions are also met with local customers. They're often in other venues. And pretty much across the board, they all have sophisticated musical tastes, whether it's because they are in the music programs, there are great music programs here, or just in other programs, but just diehard fans of music. One interview summed it up by offering that, you know, Denton is actually the worst place to play for a band, because you look out on stage and you realize everybody that's watching is in a band, and most likely that band is better than yours. Now, that line of thinking is offered in various forms by others, but it was always tempered with the corresponding observation that audiences were open to innovation, trying new things. In fact, to be successful as a band, I'm told, you have to be innovative, pushing boundaries. Otherwise, you won't gain an audience in Denton. And I've seen this firsthand in a lot of my observation research. Now, one of the ways that music scenes don't quite fit with Porter's cluster theory was in terms of competition and rivalry, which would be at the top. 61% of people I interviewed claimed Denton's scene wasn't competitive. 39% stated that it was, but yet of those people, 89% of them tempered it with the competition being, quote, positive or healthy, friendly. Now, cluster theory offers that you must have vigorous competition in order to advance as a cluster and be economically successful. Now, this is one side of the story, but then the only other, one of the very few scenes that has been addressed in academic literature was Athens, Georgia phenomenal scene in the 1980s. It gave us B-52s, Pylon, REM. And in that research, the researcher found that there was no competition whatsoever. No one would say it was competitive. And that's an arguably more financially successful scene than ours could be. So that begs for more research, but it also might speak to the fact that, to be honest, economic cluster theory was not designed to address cultural production initially. So again, room for more research. Okay, now that we've briefly reviewed the locational influences on Denton's music scene that give it a competitive advantage, does it capitalize on them like a traditional economic cluster defined by Michael Porter? Does Denton's music scene have a competitive advantage in productivity, innovation, and new business formation? Well, in terms of productivity, yes. As we've discussed, the access to specialized inputs and employees in the form of highly skilled students in all programs drives the scene. It increases productivity across all facets. In addition, the wide array of musical equipment available in music stores, and particularly pawn shops, I've been told, rivals most cities such as like New York, Seattle, Los Angeles. Basically, the tools are here. Like reporter notes that in any successful economic cluster, there's a plethora of tools and they're often traded amongst participants. There's definitely an atmosphere of information that facilitates knowledge spillover amongst the members. Information exchange ranges from gear choices and recording techniques to tour management and band counting. Now, like Silicon Valley, there's a fluid flow of people amongst bands and other firms. In fact, I was told, quote, everybody plays in 5 bands. But this isn't looked at upon as a bad thing. Like Silicon Valley, it's something that you want to happen because everyone has learned to be a better musician. They're trading information, coming back to a project. Sometimes learning so much, they decide I'm going to start a new project. And then some of these reach national and international success, becomes an established firm. Now, it is interesting though where this knowledge transfer takes place. Most of the scene is clustered around downtown. But interviewees were telling me that transfer takes place all over the city. Restaurants, venues, bars, coffee shops, church, even the university corner. And this is, I found to be the most fascinating thing, because honestly, about 10 o'clock every day, you're gonna find me at the program is doing something that they're doing from the office. And I always run into people that play in bands. One of my interviewees stated that, well, here's the deal, I've been on tour for the rest of the year. Most of my friends have been on tour this year. First thing I do when I come home, I have to get something from the refrigerator. I invariably run into someone else that's been on tour. So the talk always goes to music. Did you play Iowa City? How was Iowa City? Hey, the Soundman singles, what do you think about him? I'm going to do a new t-shirt. What's the best place to get print? That was his take on it. The Kroger was one of the few places he was able to get quickly to because he had to get something to go back to tour. This density also breeds complementarities, and it's mostly in marketing. Bands co-hosting shows, co-hosting all-day festivals. Denton, we love the festival. Venues working with bands, record companies, screen printers to have a special night, a CD release party. That happens quite often. Other businesses getting involved in the fray. Sometimes even the city will work with a musical entity like the 35 Band Festival. It all basically boils down to you're trying to get one audience to interact with another audience for the benefit of both audiences, complement each other. This happens quite often. Now, Denton's music scene also experiences increased innovation. New buyer needs are often addressed via discussion concerning what Porter would say is new technological, operating, or delivery possibilities. Participants constantly were engaging with new ways to record, release, and market music. Even in my general observation, outside of my hardcore research, if I had $1 for every time I was involved in the conversation of, hey, I just recorded these songs, I don't know if I should release it as a vinyl, if I should release it as a CD, digital download, cassette. Geez, are 8-tracks coming back? I would be a wealthy man. Now, there is also experimentation without large costs or commitment. This is very important. As I know, bands share interchange members, so it's very easy to work on something without much overhead, without great expectations, just to develop and innovate until the project gains traction. A rental house divided up amongst members of a firm, whether it's a graphic design firm, a screen printing firm, filmmaking firm, or band, really relieves overhead on the project that you're working on. If you're looking at this in terms of urban geography, the great Jane Jacobs would say, new ideas need old buildings. It is so important. In Denton, we have a plethora of old buildings, and it's the rental housing. Recording engineers, not uncommon to record bands in people's homes, in their homes. That was a common thing that came up. Oh, I recorded this in my bedroom all the time. And some of them go on to start their own studios. Talk about that a little later. One venue, Rubber Gloves, was a DIY space booking bands no other venue was interested in. It was totally off the radar, but it started to gain an audience, decided to go legit, gained the licensing, is now a legitimate venue raising tax revenue for the city. Across the board, no one said the scene hindered innovation in any way. And this is very important, regardless of gender, barrier to entry was low. This is very important because a lot of people that study economic development, whether locally or in, say, the global south, notice that if you marginalize women from economic development or economics in general, you will, and it's been studied, the studies that's been proven via quantitative data, you will basically be hurting your own bottom line. Women are incredibly important, as are men, in the economic development of communities everywhere. And that's really, it's a string of research that's very exciting because it's true. Now, the innovation and productivity in the music scene definitely fosters a healthy amount of new business formation. All scene participants interviewed noted that there were ample inputs for business formation within the scene. This music scene is a healthy marketplace to launch new firms. And firm creation does not just come from within. It's not just endogenous purpose. You have people that are coming to Denton just to participate in the scene and develop their own firms, which is awfully similar to Silicon Valley that attracts entrepreneurs and tech coders and such from all over the world. Now, sampling of these new firms is illustrated here. Of course, this is not, by all means, even a thumbnail sketch of the firms that have emerged in the past few decades that Denton's music scene has been active. And to be honest, this isn't even the thumbnail sketch of the new firms that were developed while I was conducting research. Now, I'd like to talk just a bit about some of these firms to kind of show how this all comes together. First one would be Packard Industries. A couple of students from the art school decided to screen print some t-shirts for their friend's band. It went over really well. They did a great job. Those t-shirts are awesome. I still know people that have that first t-shirt. And they started doing more of this, and eventually they all lived in the same house, were doing work in the house, until it got to the point where it, quote, sucked living with the business in the house. They have since expanded 2 more times, and now have contracts both professionally and citywide that have caused them to basically become a full-time firm. It's highly successful. And this is interesting in that they use innovation in the fact of during a complimentary marketing night, what they did was they thought they were perceiving new buyer needs, is what it would suggest. They thought, you know, I wonder if our buyers would like to be able to choose exactly what they want at the time that they're on the show, instead of just purchasing something already screen printed. So they had Dead Meat Print Show, which is a combination of the entrepreneurs from Gutter, the venue Rubber Gloves, and Penn Actor, as well as the School of Visual Arts. And what they did was they had live screen print. Now, granted, not a new idea, but it's innovative in what they did is that they marketed it, and they were the only ones doing it at DFW, and it was a huge success. You could choose what t-shirt, what color, what design you wanted on it. They had a couple designs ready. Because of this, it started to spin and become bigger and bigger. And now, in the DFW region, if you are doing live screen printing at a festival, you're most likely going to be having Penn Actor. And in a region of over 5 million people, as you can imagine, that's a pretty big boost to the bottom line. Another interesting firm is the band Midlake, and we're very lucky to have here in the audience. They are the quintessential band that did their business, lived, rehearsed, recorded in their rental home. Once they got to a point where they reached critical mass, and they became an export of them, honestly, going to the rest of the nation as well as internationally, you know, they were able to, again, it sucked living with the business. They were able to move to different homes and continue on. Well, what they did is, say, very similar to a Hewlett Packard, they decided to reinvest in their firm and subsequently reinvest in the city. So they spun off into Redwood Studios, which the drummer Mackenzie Smith owns. They also have their own studio, which occasionally rents and incorporates people from outside of the Denton scene. And they also dabbled in some ways, what you could call urban redevelopment, in Pascal Bar, which was an empty space above Andy's on the square that it was a perfect place to have a new bar branded, more or less a mid-lake branded bar. And it was a way to again reinvest in the band and reinvest in the city. And within days of it opening, it became a huge success, and it still is. And it brought an empty space back onto the tax rolls. There's also a commercial music company that's spun out of this. So in a way, Mid-Lake has become the Hewlett Packard in Texas. Another interesting situation is Baptist Jones. Here you have a local artist that's signed to arguably one of the largest independent record labels in the world. In the back of Dan Silverleaf, which is a local watering hole, we'll talk about a little later, sketching ideas in the back of a napkin, thinking that wouldn't it be great if we had a South by Southwest in downtown Denton. And because of the collision of people, the knowledge transfer, the information exchange, he was able to get several people to help with this vision. It spins off and becomes the 35 Denton Music Festival, which has an estimated economic impact in the city of over $2 million. So again, this is justice mattering. Another interesting, actually, before I leave this slide, Neon Indian is actually a friend of mine that started in Denton, but moved away, but there was this brain circulation, which is a theory by Annalie Saxene, who looks at the fact that sometimes, well, basically, you have knowledge in one place that will go back to where it came from, when you go forward to where it's going, and it becomes a circulatory thing. Well, Alan ends up living in Brooklyn, but continues to employ people. In fact, some people in my band are now doing Neon Indian. And he also employs people in visual arts, and he keeps in contact. And this is something economic development professionals are looking at in terms of an alumni. But keep in contact with your successful people that leave your city, because A, you never know when they might come back, and B, you never know when they might employ people from your city to go there. It will circulate that. So again, this is all happening through Denton's music scene. Now, after spending several years on this project, I can say that Denton's music scene is definitely an economic cluster as defined by Michael Porter. It has locational competitive advantages that result in increased productivity, innovation, and new business formation. Let's go back to regional growth theory. Now, where we left off last was human capital theory, which offers that educated, highly skilled human capital and technology help propel certain regions to be more successful than others. And we just discussed economic cluster theory, which offers that it is the dynamics of certain locations and how that human capital interacts with that propels the region. Now, Richard Florida examines these scenarios, agrees that human capital and technology are important variables, but then asks the question, well, why does educated, highly skilled human capital live where it does? He suggests that the educated, highly skilled human capital driving economic clusters are attracted to certain regions in part due to a wide array of amenities, a certain lifestyle. One of which of these, he suggests, is a thriving music scene. Now, Elizabeth Currid Hawken, although not specifically detailing music scenes, in fact, it was tangential to her work, and she really wasn't looking at economic clusters either. She, while looking at New York City's cultural production, suggests, like Florida, that arts agglomerations, like music scenes, may play multiple roles as a tool for urban economic development. It includes acting as a branding agent, a redevelopment catalyst. They can be industries in their own right, and they can serve as amenities, attracting new residents who are often this, again, educated, highly skilled human capital, the labor that propels the economies in the new digital age. Now, I didn't expect to look at this while I was doing my research, but it became more apparent that my research also fit into this framework. Basically, Denton's music scene does all of this to varying degrees. It helps brand the city, either officially, as in the phrase Denton Original Independent, or unofficially, when people say, oh, the city's like Austin. You know, there's an immediate recognition that Denton is a creative city that's fun and exciting. Of my participant sample, the majority were creative professionals outside of music. And you gotta remember, 99% of people in music scenes are not going to be doing that as their career. But I would argue 90% of them want to be there and doing that regardless of what they do in their career. They're not interested in becoming rock stars or professional musicians. They love playing music. And being around a music scene is exciting and something that they would select when they're looking for where to live. And these people are also teachers, educators. In my case, they were photographers, web application developers, gallery managers, library associates, advertising operators. These are the people who want to live in your city and region. And they're attracted to music scenes. The overwhelming majority of my sample migrated to Denton due to the city's music scene. And none of the study participants were actually from Denton. 60% had bachelor degrees or above. Now, in addition, during my research, companies like the advertising firm Slosh, with at the time 9 employees, and Gisati, an IT firm who had at the time over 20 employees, remained and relocated to Denton due to some degree of the city's music culture. The scene acted as a catalyst for urban redevelopment, with, as I talked about earlier, Dan Silverleaf igniting significant redevelopment on the East Hickory Street corridor. This is something the city had wanted to do for years. It was even in their plan, but they had no idea how to do it. They actually kind of thought Dan Yalika, of Dan Silverleaf, was a little nutty, wanting to do down it. But again, new ideas need old buildings. Cheap real estate. Dan had a lot of great ideas to have bands play there, book there. It was a perfect match. People started coming in. You have a cluster of people. Those people start realizing, you know, there's other places we can go down here. Developers start realizing there's people coming down here. It was a perfect marriage. Now, if you go in there on Friday or Saturday night, you can't get a parking space. Rubber Gloves was an adaptive reuse of a former concrete offices building that was kind of a living space as well. They brought it onto the tax rolls. We talked about Pascal. So turned an underutilized space on the square, nonetheless, into an amazing boom for the revenue of tax revenue in the city. Denton scene, and this is exciting because I've never seen this either, it's also community development catalyst. Former members transitioned into the city council, Kevin Rogers with us, members of the economic development department, and also they raised significant sums of money. Even while I was just researching this, several $1,000s was raised by music scene participants for charities in the city of Denton. And also, many scene participants participate in commissions and committees. Now, as I was completing my research, I couldn't help but think, is this happening also? Well, I came to find that it certainly was. In Omaha, South Creek Records turned out to be a bunch of high school kids getting together. They made a cassette of 100 cassettes to sell their friend Connor Overs, and who's now Bright Eyes, and they have now well surpassed over 2.5 million units sold. What they did was, much like Midlake, they decided to reinvest in their city, and South Creek Records was a direct firm spin-off of Oklahoma's music scene. So with the help of the city and $1.5 million of tax incremental financing funding, the label with developers that were associated with the label were able to do a $10.2 million urban redevelopment project that was the cornerstone of a parcel of land that the city had wanted to develop for a long time. It was a complete brownfield. The project housed the label's offices, but also an incredible venue, retail space, and it was an immediate hit. Within a year, it was already receiving national and international recognition. The estimation of the redevelopment around it, sparked by that one project, was well over $100 million. Now, in this case, Omaha's music scene filled the role of branding agent because it somewhat made Omaha a hit brand. In fact, as an aside, when I was doing this research, I was told that there were a lot of brands, as you see Urban Outfitters is in there, but a lot of national brands immediately called the day after the project was announced, saying, look, we want to be a part of this. We want to be a part of the Omaha brand. And the thing was, and they freely admitted, we would never go to Omaha until this day. So they didn't care about the names. They wanted to be part of the brand. It was also worked as an amenity. Several people stayed in Omaha because of this project and the energy. Several people moved back. Obviously, it was a redevelopment catalyst. And it's also become an industry in its own right. Since I've written about Omaha, several labels have started. There's a merchandising company and management. If you look to Seattle, this is probably the most famous of this. Basically, the Pacific Northwest scene was a regional scene, but for many different factors in the late 80s, it focused on Seattle and the grunge explosion. By 1994, Seattle had become a mecca for musicians. And we're not just talking about indie rock, we're talking about jazz, hip hop, folk. Everyone was descending, and to be honest, still does descend upon Seattle. It was estimated that the album sales, the gross revenue just during the grunge era was over $200 million. It, more importantly, launched careers for people in art, design, music, management that are still operating to this day with international recognition. In this case, the scene operated in the role of branding agent. I mean, Seattle was one of the hippest cities in the world. It worked as an amenity, it attracts people, still does. It's an industry in its own right, but it's also a community development agent. Many of the people in the initial grunge explosion have gone on to work in different nonprofit and government organizations within the city. This is probably the most interesting example I saw. Flint, Michigan. Now, I don't know how many of you have ever seen the movie Roger and Me, but basically, it wasn't looking up for Flint for a long time. It was more or less a whole-scale urban economic collapse. I use this one as an example when I teach economic development because they basically did everything wrong. The auto industry, the end of manufacturing was coming, the auto industry was restructuring, it pulled out of the city, lots of jobs lost. We're talking thousands of jobs. At the same time, the population that was there, that was doing well, was moving out of the city into a standard similar to migration. The city basically freaked out, didn't know what to do, decided to not listen to the community and go with very non-organic, top-down planning initiatives that were ostensibly for economic development that unfortunately failed miserably because it really had no connection to the community. I was told that, quote, the downtown was left for dead. Now, to get an idea, there's two ways you can really explain how dead this downtown was. There was a DIY all-ages club called Flint Local 432. Well, their thought was, cheap real estate. So they go to downtown, buy a building for $500 with a few thousand to be paid off later, and open up a club. And it becomes a huge hit. Now, to explain how desolate it was for the many years this club was open, one of the co-owners told me that, at one point he was bored, decided to strip naked, ride his Vespa around until the cops arrested him. After 20 minutes, he got tired, and was back. What happened though is they were attracting an estimated 14,000 kids a year, under 21, to downtown. Well, I don't know about you, but when I was under 21, if I was able to run rampant around the downtown, you would of course find cheap lots. How cool is that? Places that have businesses, things that are shuttered that, with a little bit of paint can be great. And I can buy a building for $500. Kids start moving downtown. Now, unfortunately, at one point, for just various reasons unrelated to economics, the two people that are running the Flint Local 432 had to leave. So they, after several years, they shut it down for a couple of years. Well, at the same time, the Charles Stewart Mott Foundation, which is a gigantic philanthropic enterprise, was based in Flint. And the executives were coming in and started noticing that there weren't these kids, their friends, sons and daughters, they weren't there skateboarding. They weren't there when it was already dark at 6 or 7 at night. And they started to wonder why. They never really noticed that the downtown was truly dead because of all these kids. So being the smart as they are, they tracked the people down and said, look, what's going on? And they found out it was basically because of this one all-ages DIY club. So they found the owners of that club and said, look, you need to apply to us for a grant. So the owners did and received a $250,000 grant. They reopened the club and now provide a wide array of services, music almost every night, but they also have theater, dance, art, and at the same time this is happening, the kids that were still living down there were also doing their spin-offs and creating businesses, as well as encouraging other artists to come down there. Now it's not uncommon to have an outdoor fashion show in downtown Flint. They have this then spilled over into more mainstream things like auto shows. I think it's called Bricks and Pistons, something like that. It's huge. It's very thousands of people come out to this. So if you look at Flint downtown now, it's thriving. And one gigantic part of this was Flint Local 432, an all ages venue. So in this case, the roles that the music scene played were one of them amenity, attracting people, urban development for sure, and also community development. A lot of people that are involved with Flint Local 432 actually eventually end up into positions of the city government, working in planning things, environmental issues. So it's definitely happening all over the country. Question I always receive is, okay, so how do you build a city on rock and roll? And as amusing as that is, there's actually a chapter in my dissertation. Well, how do you build a city on rock and roll? Because you can do it. It's actually pretty easy and no cost. The first step is to listen. You most likely already have some type of music scene in your city. What type of genres are represented? Who are the key people involved? What can your office do to help them? Often it doesn't cost much. It may be shutting down a street for a music festival for a day, or offering temporary parking permits for bands to load and unload. Like, it doesn't seem like a big deal, but when you're in Austin, if you can imagine a place like 6th Street, trying to park your car for 15 minutes, trying to unload, it's a huge problem. It's a problem even in Dallas sometimes. And it's something that is basically free to do if we're a city. Next, establish formal communication channels between city representatives and elected officials. Make sure that all the genres in your scene are represented. And you have to remember this, music scenes are usually multi-genre. In Denton, you have everything from extreme harsh noise to Americana, jazz, hip-hop, indie rock. It's all here, and it's all self-identified as Denton's music scene. The strategy of making a music commission or a music committee that reports to the city council and the mayor has been really successful in Seattle and Austin. It's a great way to know what's going on and just find out how to help. Again, it doesn't cost money. Now, find ways, and this is, I would almost argue the most important thing, find ways to either sustain or help develop an all-ages DIY club in your city. These are the incubators of talent for your city. Every hugely successful scene can be traced back to at least one DIY venue, or if not two. In one club alone in Seattle, the other 21 scene members that was participating in this one specific all-ages club went on to have high-profile careers in bands, management, design, photography, label ownership, and political action. We're talking multi-billion-dollar careers. In addition to helping young bands learn the ropes of how to be in a band, which is pretty important, DIY clubs now offer classes on entrepreneurship, business development, because entrepreneurs are getting younger. It's not beyond the realm of imagination to think that this young lady who's a senior in high school is an app developer and making 50 grand a year, and also in a band. And the more that people research and understand how bands operate, it's pretty similar to operating an app development firm. This is what's happening, and it's happening younger and younger and younger. Finally, it may be a music scene, but it is an economic cluster. Treat it as such. Clusters cut across industries and are notoriously hard to quantify. Help your music scene holistically. What may help a band might also help a screenwriter, an app developer, and vice versa. Oftentimes, they may all be in the same sort of employment situation. It may be the same person. This is the economic reality we're living with right now in cities. So in conclusion, music scenes can function like economic clusters. They can help brand a city, act as an amenity, work as a catalyst for urban development, and also be an industry in its own right. Music scenes can also foster community development. Now, it's my hope that this research, sure, it would be great if my research helps to push forward the whole concept of urban regional growth, or even adds to the canon of economic development literature. I'm not gonna lie, it would be great. But what is most important to me is that in some way, this research, and by giving it to you all, and you can tell your friends, it empowers scene members, as well as the city representatives who want to work with scene members, that they can work together And not just for the benefit of each other, but for the benefit of the cities in which they live. Now, most of you know I live in Denton, so I don't have to sleep in the van tonight, but I'm very excited about that. I'll be here at the after party, of course. I'm always at the after party. Mary will be there as well. But if you don't get a chance to talk to me, please visit the Atlantic City Lab. I have an author page there. I have several articles about this very topic on there, and I'm a contributing writer. Follow me on Twitter. I talk about this sort of thing, as well as urban geography issues, human geography issues, economic geography issues, planning. That's where it all goes, is on my Twitter. And visit my website. You can download a lot of my articles there as well. I'd like to thank the UNT Geography Department, of which I'm a proud alumni, and for everyone inviting me and listening. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Michael. That was super. We do have time for a few questions here if you do have any.
Any questions on service road?
Seman, thank you so much for this presentation. And it's a great service for the city of Denton, certainly, to kind of get under the hood to see what's going on grassroots-wise in this particular scene. You intentionally connected it to the tech scene by kind of comparing it to Hewlett Packard. In both cases, you mentioned there's kind of this real grassroots level kind of platform for low entry innovation to happen, a collision of great talented minds and stuff like that. In your research, it seems like that would extend to all sorts of economic clusters. Is that the case? I mean, should a city be thinking about this on every level? I mean, I've been thinking about, we got the community market person behind you, and that's a great low cost entry for entrepreneurs. Should the city be thinking about this on all levels, not just music?
Yes, absolutely. One thing that I would like to branch out into, and it's pointing that way, is the DIY national economy. I mean, basically, after the Great Reset or the 2008 economic crash, what was fascinating is the proliferation of maker spaces, artisanal food, farm to market. People were forced to go back to what they love to do and start these innovative businesses. And any economic cluster, the basic, one of the basic items that you have to look at is literally the clustering, the density, the knowledge spillover. That's when it happens. And that's, economic clusters. You can look at the California wine industry. Again, and when I say density, also think of, it's not always just geographic density, because to be honest, Silicon Valley is huge. Napa Valley is huge. It doesn't always have to be the Jane Jacobs notion of the sidewalk ballet, but there is something to be said for literally running into someone's business. But it's the density of community. So I mean, Denton's fairly spread out. And people were saying, you have to drive to a lot of places, but the community is strong. And it's strong because we also have technological tools. Like, how many of you are here because I posted something on Facebook? Great, yeah. So we have these virtual communities. They're actually playing out in urban communities. So it's the virtual space into the geographic space. So it's not only a matter of like putting up incubation spaces, which would be a great thing for the city of Denton. I know I think we all are talking about that. That's great, but yes, definitely. I love doing this research because it's not just about tech. It can be anything. I was in consulting for Chicago, this was last year, and we're driving down Main Street, and this guy's like, oh man, check out that alley. I was like, all right. And he's like, there is a brewery down there I'm dealing with, or not a brewery, a distillery, that has huge plants in Japan for whiskey. It's just the product of whiskey made in Chicago, and apparently it's very good. It wasn't at the after party. But it's very good in being imported. It's a growth company. But you wouldn't know that. But I would make money on the fact that the person that's running a distillery is somewhere bumping into people that are doing similar work as a cluster. So I would say yes, absolutely. This cuts across, the concepts cut across many different industries. Is that answer?
Absolutely.
Okay. Sir?
You talked a lot about that in terms of the spatial concentration. What about the temporal component? When did this all kick off and why this is dead downtown? What
Absolutely.
created this?
That is something that I would love to turn this into a book. The more I worked on it, the more I realized this is not only talks about one concept, but it really also reflects the city of Denton. I don't know how many of you have been here or how many that long, but the city of Denton has changed, without doubt. The only way you could truly examine the city of Denton's cultural economy would be to take into consideration its political nature over the past few decades, its economic nature, and its cultural nature. The music scene goes in waves. What I was able to trace it back to was basically 1970s. And even then, maybe like 72, 73. One of the absolute first house shows, Shipley Manor, and this was just for me interviewing people, trying to get this all triangulated, was actually Oak Street Draft House. That was Shipley Manor. They had great house shows. That was the first documented house show I could get verification of. So we're looking at maybe the early 70s. It burst in about 90, 91. And then leading up to that, and to be honest, all across the country, and you have to spread back or widen your focus and look at the music industry at that time. That's the birth of indie rock. It was basically Black Flag, setting up sporting networks, distribution networks, through SSD records, and connecting these scenes across the country. Then once that hit maturity, we looked about the 80s, people figured out, oh, I can do this myself. And so you had these scenes in like smaller off-market places. So you had things like Athens exploding. Denton was doing very well. So by the 90s, it just hit critical mass and exploded. Nirvana and Seattle was really the focal point for that. But honestly, that was going on all over the country. Major labels had a ton of money. They were trying to get their last grasp, and that's a whole other lecture. Just throwing money. So what they did was, invariably, became the biggest advertisement for independent labels by making these indie bands, these household names. So that really kind of brought it into the next phase. And then Denton was for sure in the 90s. We had things like space rock. Then that started dying out in the 2000s. In some ways, I don't know if any of you study economics, but you're looking at things called K-waves. And basically, one thing I'm going to start looking at is, can you quantify cultural production and the ebbs and flows it has? Every scene has an ebb and flow. Is it similar reasoning why it happens as K-waves, which look at 45 to 50-year economic cycles, or kitchen waves, which are about 4 to 5 year cycles. So we're looking at, long answer to the question, looking at basically the early 70s to now. There's a lot of different factors at play, political and economic. There's a lot more redevelopment that's come in. We're north of Dallas. There's the idea of, correct me if I'm wrong, David Harvey, the economic geographer, is looking at spatial fixes. Basically, money goes where it's most needed and you can make the most money back. Denton was thoroughly underdeveloped for many years for political reasons. Now money is flowing in because it's perhaps you can get a bigger return on your investment if you redevelop Denton than you can in CZ or CY. So there's that as well as looking at the broader economic geography. Is that where we going where you're thinking?
Yeah, well, it makes me think of another question, because it sounds like that it's really kind of indie rock based, which kind of has its own demographic of fans. Have you thought about looking at other types? I mean, because it seems like you could look at blues or jazz historically, and have a place like Clarksville, Mississippi, and then being like so how maybe do these other genres of music how do they affect different places and the types of demographics?
Absolutely. Absolutely. One project I've been trying to get off the ground for years, and I have a really extensive contact network with the music industry, but still trying to get to this one space, is I would love to write the academic article that compares Compton to Seattle. Did you imagine if your city has a thriving music scene that is in every single branding way what you would not want as a city representative? Yeah. But the thing is, it was phenomenally successful. But I would argue it was phenomenally successful because of the economic geography aspect of it, that it was 20 miles from Beverly Hills in the entertainment industry. So there's a lot to be said for that. But you're exactly right. This goes across, this isn't just indie rock. And if you look at Denton, we have a thriving hip-hop scene. In fact, I would argue now it's the most successful facet of our scene going. When I moved here 10 years ago, the most successful facet was the very experimental noise rock sort of thing. So yeah, absolutely. It's all a matter of selecting the lens with which you'd like to review this kind of thing. Yes, the short answer, it goes across genre, and you can talk about many different scenes in many different cities in that way. Nashville is a great example. I mean, the gold standard for all of this is really Nashville country music. Talk about an economic cluster that is very similar to Silicon Valley as well. And a lot of that started because of the technology, because of radio. The music scene sort of followed. You know, they needed programming for the radio, and that's why we have music.
I had a follow-up question about hip hop then, because this is interesting to me. So you have someone like Iggy the Great, who basically lyrically kind of sustains and thrives on the struggles that he's met in South Denton and the sort of divisive geography of Denton, North versus South. So what happens whenever the movement culturally itself depends on the city's laws to survive?
Oh, right, which you could adapt to the concept of Compton.
Exactly.
Based around the 90s.
So how did Compton survive despite that?
Well, the thing is, Compton is, I would argue, no more or less better or worse off than it was at the time. And I think, in a way, what you could ask is how would the city capitalize on its music scene? That's a valid question. I don't have the answer to that because it would be up to the city representatives. How do they reverse that? Now, in the case of the VB, from everything, hanging out with him and understanding where his direction is, it's more of a self-empowering community development aspect. With gangster rap, it unfortunately wasn't that way, but it was also perhaps one of the greatest sociological lenses to understand what literally was going on in South Central Los Angeles. So there really isn't any easy answer to that. It's up to the players involved. And I'm sure Councilor Grove could say, it changes from day to day.
I think we got time for one more question, and then we'll move to next door here.
I'm interested that you examine the unique industry vis-a-vis cluster theory. Do you think by examining the music industry, you were able to add anything conceptually to cluster theory, firstly? And if you look at music in the context of cluster theory, how would you associate it with the volatility of capital? So, place stickiness is associated with the fixity and mobility nature of capital. But where would the music industry fit into that capital mobility as opposed to place mobility? And stemming out of the question, I'm also interested in finding out why you restricted yourself to cluster theory, to the idea of Florida's creative city, because you described the case of Flint also. You said you are interested in economic development. Now, something like the Flint case has happened in England also, and Doreen Massey examined that in the context of uneven development. When capital flies away from coal industry, the new rounds of capital comes in to employ pink-collared workers in a new round of exploitation. It would be very romantic to say that it's redevelopment. It's actually a new round of exploitation just coming in because the real industry is destroyed. So why didn't you use other concepts? And why did you stick to cluster theory, which is often labeled as old wine in new bottle, by many geographers. I'm sure you have read that article.
Yeah, sure. Well, unfortunately, I had about a year to do this. My advisor was not at all economic, and I was pretty much, I knew what I wanted to do, and I had a certain time frame in which to do it. So that was one big thing with it. The other is I noted that there's a lot of research that would examine music scenes, but just tangential. They would say things like, oh, it's custom. But to be honest, they would say that, and then they would basically talk about how it was operating within the larger music industry at a very high level. So it was basically obscuring what was really going on. And I saw that as an entry into, this would be the way to explain what is going on in the music scene that economic development professionals, students, city representatives could best understand. Well, what I would have loved to have done if I had more time would be to incorporate different cities and also looking at it from more of an economic standpoint. My work is mostly more of like an urban geography sort of situation, planning, a lot of planning literature, because that's where I was in the program. But yeah, honestly, this could go on further. Just spin off and spin off. These are so many angles that have been basically largely untapped. As far as marginalization of different economic people in different economic stratospheres, that's a whole nother situation I would love to example. And so both questions brought that up. I mean, you know, heck, if you want to get into that, I mean, let's just talk about deep health. That's a fascinating case study and something I considered looking at and how that's changed and who benefited, who was marginalized. But I only had so much time. I was working full time teaching and doing my PhD, so it was a little tight. But it's an excellent point for future research.
All right.
Time for the after party.
I think so. Thanks once again.